Hello, masters. How are you? Good morning. Today we are going to talk about a beautiful subject, a very deep subject that gives logic to many pains, to many people who finally find through this explanation a logic to the inexplicable, a logic to a pain, often a pain from childhood. I would say that most of the time. We are going to talk about biological love. In Humano Puente, we don't call hate what is commonly called hate. We call it biological love or misunderstood love. And it is not for a negation or to put ourselves in a position of saying that everything is light, everything is love, and many other things that are wonderful, but that in general are said but are not exercised, are said but are not understood. That is why on the one hand, namaste, and on the other hand, so many symptoms. That is why on the one hand, namaste, and on the other hand, I hate you and I do not speak to you anymore. And that is why on the one hand, namaste, and on the other hand, I criticize you or judge you. That is because one really does not go to the origin of what causes the pain. At this moment, there is a white great egret, doves, lapwings. Maybe there is a chimango because everything is in turmoil. When there is a chimango flying around, all the alarms are turned on, and even more so when there is a crested caracara present. The dove represents the soul, and what is related to hawks and falcons, like the chimango, represents the spirit. The chimango represents the permanence, and the dove represents the renewal, the birth. That act in which the chimango eats a dove has always been very ancient and symbolic. By the way, I tell you this because of this noise. When a child is abandoned and does not understand, he or she is wrapped in a very big emotion. There he goes, they are kicking out the chimango. They are all in a flurry. It is beautiful to see how nature acts. When a person leaves his or her clan and leaves his children, he or she usually responds to a previous force that we are going to explain later. But several things can happen. In biology, there are certain things that are registered to the unconscious mind, as I explained in many previous videos, even in those videos in which I had an angry face before discovering reorexins. Biology has a mandate that is repetition, only the repetition of the events that led to life and avoiding the events that led to death. But be careful, because in these events that lead to death there is a nuance of things. One thing is every event in which there has been a death of a young person or at the age of being a parent, a teenager, a child, a baby. That is the most serious and the strongest. But then those who leave, for example, a child is born and his father leaves, a child is born and they give it away, a child is born and his mother gives him up, a child is born and his mother sells it, she does not raise it. All these things are noted as death, separations. When I stop having sensory contact with that person, it is a death for my unconscious mind. But also, there are some things that are not allowed for the unconscious mind. For example, we are one of the few species, because other species do it while playing, in which a parent is capable of hitting a child. It is a very rare act for biology, and the unconscious mind notes it as not repeating. And also the word almost, you have to be attentive to almost. When I was born, my mother almost died. I went on a trip and I almost died. Those words, and also the phrase, I wanted to die. The unconscious mind takes those things practically with the same intensity as real death. It tends to avoid them. The beatings and the almost or the I wanted to die, it tends to avoid them. It makes them not repeat. It makes a chip wake up in our unconscious mind so as not to repeat them. So, for example, when there is a physically abusive parent up there in the grandparents, look where I'm leaning. Where is this from? This fabric was brought to me by my son. It is a fabric from which a cushion cover was made. Where is it from? No, it is from Indonesia. That ancient knowledge, this Chicana traveled all over the world. And at this moment, when everything we mentioned about China in the coronavirus article we published on Facebook is happening, this Chicana is also traveling the world. It is even trendy at IKEA. There are famous people with these pillows at this moment. This ancient cross speaks of things as deep as we are not biology. The fact is that if someone is physically abused up there, a mandate will remain in his unconscious mind that will be the first tendency for that to be repeated. And the second tendency is not to repeat it, but he or she will tend to fulfill the first one. What is the first one? He may hit his son. But if he has a reaction, since it has been recorded in such a strong way, the fact that that puts biology in danger, this next person can get to abandon his son. And he does it because he feels that if he stays with him, the child is in danger. The same thing happens when there was sexual abuse in the clan. I have seen cases where a person came to see why his father had abandoned him. How could it be that life is so cruel and he had abandoned him at the age of 4? And when we performed reorixins, he saw that his father had been abused by his father after the age of 4, being 5 years old. So this father left out of love. The client understood in 1 second all his life of trying to explain that. He met his father again. He understood that his father loved him in a wrong way. That is biological love. In all the symptoms where there are, and this can be assured, although some in their case say, no, not in my case. He's bad, he's terrible. My mom told me that he was a terrible person. My dad told me she was terrible. In all the cases where there is an act that goes against what biology commands, that is to say that the clan is united, that it is healthy, that it is fed, that it is abundant. In any case that goes against that, that is to say where there is violence, where there is abandonment, where there is separation, where there is abuse, it is because above happened the events that led to that. That is to say that hate, and what humanity commonly calls hate and judgment, have a lot to do with this, and we are going to talk about it in another video. Is not hate, it is misunderstood love, misunderstood love. You are going to see, and I write it in this book, if you know your history, if you can get into it and you have histories of violence, that the clans repeat a cycle. Physically abusive, abandoner individual below. It is very likely that the abandoned one is physically abusive when he grows up. And below the physically abusive comes the one who abandons, and below the one who abandons comes the physically abusive. Until when? Until you become aware. Of course, in the clans there are also physically abusive individuals, and in the next generation, no one hits nor abandons. It is my case. My father was brutally beaten, and my father was a saint with me. He was a present father. He was the best father in the world. And my mother was also beaten, and she was present, and she was the best mother in the world. I am always talking about when you do not become aware. When you become aware is when you cut that, when one says, I will not repeat what happened to me. The rest is biological love, misunderstood love, what humanity commonly calls hate. Thank you all, I love you, have a beautiful weekend, understand the depth of biology. No, assume that actually biology is in function of a much greater learning. And for a much greater place in which we have always been, and from which we create all this wonderful reality. I send you a hug. I love you. All the information as always on my Instagram profile and at humanappuente.com. A big hug.